Hi, thank you. So originally I was going to talk about collaborative research and extension programs. And, as Beth's presentation this morning indicated, over the last 16, 17 years, there have been a lot of projects funded by the Pierce's Disease Glassy-Winged Sharpshooter Board. And a lot of that was collaborative efforts between extension personnel and university personnel, researchers with the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And I really didn't have a good way to sort of encapsulate all of that in a brief presentation. So what I thought I would do is talk about more broadly collaborative programs and sort of show the participants and also show who has what we in the US call skin in the game. I don't know if that makes sense here. Yeah, okay, all right. Who's putting in real money, in other words, right? So who's contributing real money to the effort? So again, this is my program. We have extension personnel all over the state, some of whom are involved in grape research and extension, and some in other areas that you can see up there. There we go. Okay, so we've already talked quite a lot about Pierce's disease of grapes in California, and for the Pierce's disease glassy-winged sharpshooter program, that's an assessment on wine grape growers. The table grape growers and the raisin growers don't contribute to that program. They do have their own industry commodity programs, and occasionally there will be collaborative funding back and forth of certain programs, but it's the wine grape growers that are carrying the Pierce's disease glassy-winged sharpshooter board. And then just to remind, the really high-value grapes are in this area, Napa County, Sonoma County, a bit up into Lake County and Mendocino County. Moderate value grapes down here in the Central Coast. There's another moderate value wine grape area here in the Lodi Woodbridge area, and then a lot of the grapes in the San Joaquin Valley, where there are low value wine grapes, table grapes, and raisin grapes all together. And in recent years, our raisin producers have had real difficulty because there's been overproduction, and I think they have, last time I heard, they have something like a couple years of raisins in storage because they just can't move them fast enough. And then some grapes down here in the southern valleys, Temecula Valley, Coachella Valley. There is one variety which you can kind of use across, and that's Thompson seedless. So Thompson seedless, depending on management, you can sell it into table grapes, you can make raisins out of it, and also there's some Thompson seedless that goes into, juice for really sort of lower value, what we call jug wine, wine that you get in the, bigger volumes. So before glassy-winged sharpshooter was introduced into California, we did have Pierce's disease. It was episodic. Every couple of decades we'd get an outbreak. And we talked about the sharpshooters, the vectors, relatively small insects, didn't fly very far, blown by the wind. So really relatively limited localized spread. And it could be important for individual growers, but it wasn't a huge, Beth showed the vineyard apocalypse, right? It wasn't at that level. before glassy wing sharpshooter. Then when we had glassy wing sharpshooter and that devastation in the Southern California valleys, Temecula Valley in particular, that got a lot of people's attention. And I remember, you know, the vineyard apocalypse. I remember people saying this was an existential threat to grapes in California. There was a possibility that we weren't going to grow grapes in California because of this problem. So there was a lot of fear and anxiety and, you know, sort of panic, which drove this collaborative response. So there was funding provided from the federal government, from the state government, the counties through the county agricultural commissioners got involved. University of California researchers and extension personnel got involved. The commodity groups that were affected got involved. The wine grape growers, the American Vineyard Foundation, Table Grape Growers Association, and they also got the citrus growers to participate with them, not to put in funding, but to treat a pest that the citrus growers didn't think it is not a problem for the citrus growers. And then the nursery industry, and there's actually been, if you look at sort of winners and losers in the whole episode, right, the grape growers are the ones that have the disease and the vector and need to be protected. Citrus is helping to protect them, and they're being compensated for that. But the nursery industry has the regulations imposed on them as far as not moving glassy wing sharpshooter, but there's no compensation for that. And so the extension personnel who work with the nursery industry, that is apparently a pretty sore spot with them, is that there's a lot of expense in complying with these regulations and the inspections and the approved treatment protocol, and they're not compensated for that. At the federal level, there are a couple different federal agencies that participate. The agency that Beth is in, USDA, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Plant Protection and Quarantine. And you go to meetings and, right, people have USDA, APHIS, PPQ, right? I mean, it's like alphabet soup. But that's the group that's been contributing the funding for this area-wide program and the monitoring and the surveillance, trapping, and so forth. And then USDA ARS, which, you know, Rodrigo's here sitting in the front, a lot of participation from the researchers in that organization, trying to understand the vector, understand the pathogen, understand the disease interactions, and try to figure out practical control strategies. Initially, and Beth will correct me if I'm wrong, initially the funding for this program was about $22 million back in the early 2000s. That's slid down a bit to around 15 million recently, 14.5, I think it was. And Beth presented this morning what components that pays for, so the trapping, the monitoring, the surveillance, and the area-wide, so compensating the citrus growers for their applications. At the state level, in the state of California, we have the California Department of Food and Agriculture, which initially was contributing funding until the economic downturn and decrease in tax revenues and things like that. So they were contributing about $4 million a year until about 2012, and haven't been contributing any monetary resources in recent years. There's an effort among the growers to lobby to get the state to contribute again. And right now, they're asking for the state to contribute about $5 million a year. And they made that plea last year, and it wasn't successful, but they're doing it again this year. What the California Department of Food and Agriculture does is they manage the federal funding. So the federal money flows to the State Department of Food and Agriculture. And they also manage the funding from the self-assessment from the wine grape growers. So that's what I've got listed here is a PD-GWIS board. And I'll talk about where that money comes from in a second. But that's all grower self-assessment money. So both of those streams of money flow into the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and then they manage those funds and distribute those funds as appropriate. At the local level, we have, for each county, we have a county agricultural commissioner, and the agricultural commissioner has staff biologists who will do inspections. They'll set up traps, they'll collect the traps and monitor. So they're the people that are in the community, on the ground, doing the work with either the nursery staff or with the growers in the citrus and grape fields to do that trapping and monitoring. And I'm sure that some of the time of the staff is not compensated for. So the counties are contributing some resources in terms of their staff time. Okay, to the industries. The wine grape growers have gotten together and they voted to form this board, the Pierce's Disease Glassy Wing Sharpshooter Board, and they voted to self-assess based on the value of grapes harvested. So when the grape growers sell their product and they get whatever value from the sale, then they're assessed based on $1,000 value. And it's ranged from a low of 75 cents per $1,000 value up to a high of $2. And I think that, if I remember correctly, in the original approval, they can go as high as $3, but they haven't gone anywhere near that. And early on, when they were at $2 in the early 2000s, they were collecting about $6 million a year. And more recently, it's been $1.8 to $1.9 million a year. And that money goes primarily to fund research, but also some of the funding goes to the treatments to eradicate, to tamp down new flare-ups of glassy wing in areas that we haven't seen it before. So some of the funding goes that direction. The citrus industry participates through the area-wide program applications. So and I think this is just an amazing illustration of collaboration between industries, because it's not really a problem for the citrus growers, but they're willing to do something in order to help out the grape growers. Now, they're compensated for it, so that's helpful. More recently, the citrus growers have had their own sort of apocalyptic event, right? We've got introduction of the Asian citrus psyllid, and we've got the disease that it vectors, citrus greening or huanglongbing, and we do have citrus greening in California. We've had it in the Los Angeles area for several years, and and they've identified 50-something trees in people's backyards that have been removed. So the citrus industry is really worried, and they know that it's coming, and they're trying to prevent the spread of Asian citrusillid and then also the spread of citrus greening. So hopefully that won't become such a focus for them that they won't be willing to participate in this program anymore. And then, like I said, the Southern California nurseries, they bear the cost of compliance if they're going to be shipping nursery stock to areas outside of the area that's infested with glassy wing sharpshooter. And there was a study a few years ago that showed that that could run to $10,000 to $20,000 per nursery per year to comply, depending on the size of the nursery. Here's the glassy wing sharpshooter, Pierce's disease glassy wing sharpshooter board. It's been funding research for many, many years. Recently, they changed their logo. You can see their logo now down here, right? There's the sharpshooter and the crosshairs on a grape leaf. But they changed their slogan, right? Partnership for Wine Grape Pest Solutions. So they've expanded beyond Pierce's disease and glassy wing sharpshooter, and now they're also funding research on grapevine leaf roll associated virus, grapevine red blotch associated virus, the grape mealybug, the vine mealybug, and brown marmorated stink bug. And part of that is an outgrowth of what I showed in my presentation this morning, which is that if you're a Central Coast wine grape grower and you don't have a problem with Pierce's disease, but you're paying in year after year, you kind of wonder, you know, where's my money going and what am I getting back? And so there's been this expansion into into funding other research on other pests. The University of California has participated through research. The research scientists at the university put in proposals every year to the Pierce's disease glassy wing sharpshooter board. There's a technical review of the science of the proposals, and then there's an industry review about whether or not it's relevant, and then the board votes on whether or not to fund. And they've done a lot of work around understanding the vectors, understanding the disease, understanding Xylella, which has gotten them closer to finding a management solution. We also have participation from the extension programs. So a lot of the extension, in our system, the county extension advisors are also expected to do practical research. So they'll often collaborate with the faculty on university campuses in research because it's part of their assignment and part of their promotion process. So they are on the ground extending information to growers, but they're also participating in this applied research. So the strategy over the years has been, in the short term, to limit the spread of glassy wing sharpshooter until the science could catch up and provide a long-term control. And now that the program is, getting on towards 20 years, the medium term has been to continue that attempt to limit glassy wing sharpshooter spread, to manage glassy wing sharpshooter in the infested areas, to explore options around which hosts are I would say, less susceptible. There aren't any that are in grape that are resistant, at least among the vinifera cultivars. And looking towards that long-term solution of some kind of strong, durable Pierce's disease resistance or some other control. And I think they're getting closer on the resistance, and there are a couple of bright potential areas as far as other controls that have to do with competitive endophytes inside of the plant. So some interesting things that are coming along there. So I think that the attempting to limit the spread has been pretty successful. Here, this is from a publication a few years ago, right? So we've got the extent of spread in 2002 and then 12 years later, and it looks pretty much the same. So the limitation of glassy wing sharpshooter spread, I think, has been fairly successful. You can even see a couple areas here, Sacramento and up in Butte County, that are no longer on this map. And there is, this is a little bit larger than back in 2002, but not by a huge amount. So I think that strategy of limiting spread has been pretty successful. So what I would say about the collaboration in terms of conclusions is each of the partners needed to understand what their role and their responsibility was in terms of this overall strategy, right? So the federal money wasn't going to go into research. The grower money was primarily directed at research and directed by the growers. The growers decide what projects to fund. Everybody has skin in the game, right? Everyone is contributing resources except for the state the last few years. And really focused on a long-term solution. There was a publication in 2014 based on data from 2012, 2013. And the analysis at that point was that if you took all of the different parts, all of the different entities that were contributing towards control of glassy wing sharpshooter and Pierce's disease, the federal money, the state money, input from the counties, the university, the various commodity organizations, and the money that the grape growers themselves were spending, that was about $104 million a year to protect an industry that at that time was about $3 billion a year. Now, those are old numbers now. The grape industry in California is something like $4.9 billion. But it's still, if you think of it in terms of percentage, it's not a bad deal. So that is my conclusion on collaboration. How am I doing? Am I doing? Huh? All right.